Thank you. Thanks, Terry, and thank you to you, Ken. And yes, I hope you have lined me up quite nicely. I'm going to start off by explaining my name, because it's always a good place to start. So those of you who've met me before will have heard this piece. I was born a Basham and I married a Pyke. So as if life wasn't complicated enough being Sharanne Basham, I made it even more complicated. And Sharanne, my parents made it up. There is a bit of a corny story with it, I'm afraid. So they wanted a name that would make people smile. So to say Sharanne, you actually have to smile to say it. That's what comes of being born of hippies. I'd like to say a big thank you to the Innovation Network for inviting me along tonight. I think this is going to be really interesting, and I'm particularly looking forward to the question and answer session later on. Your questions in particular, whether I'll be able to come up with the answers, we'll see when we get there. Is that all right? There we go. So, what I'm going to talk about is my involvement with business in the community around the Low Carbon Zone programme. But I thought I'd kick off by explaining why BT is involved in sustainability and supporting this green skills agenda, particularly here in Wales. So sustainability is really important to BT, but I'm not sure a lot of people outside of BT would even know that. Obviously, we need a sustainable planet if we're going to have customers we can sell to. So the economics is absolutely there for all to see. But the environmental piece, one might think, okay, where does BT quite link into that? Well, actually, BT is an enormous consumer of energy. We use 0.7% of the national grid, so almost 1% of everything that's used in the UK is BT. So anything we do with regards to reducing our carbon footprint has a massive national impact. And we've taken that very, very seriously, that understanding of that. We actually started looking at carbon reduction way back in 1992, and we baselined and started targeting reductions from 1996, long before it was really fashionable in the big corporate world to do these things. It was very clear for us why we could do that, because the bottom line impact is millions and millions of pounds. But actually, it was just as much part of our story in terms of why we believe we should be a good corporate citizen and why it's important for us that every element of our business is sustainable. And the third aspect then, of course, is the social impact. And we recognise that the power of information and communication technologies to communities is actually vital. So actually our social impact is just as important as well there. And we recognise that people are people whether they're at home or whether they're in work. So actually good news messages and improvements can have a major impact for people right across the whole spectrum. So BT is very, very strong on its sustainability agenda. Here in Wales, an opportunity came forward from business in the community, and they asked us whether we could support them in terms of a programme that they were looking at called the Low Carbon Zone. And I was actually seconded to them for 18 months. I just finished up at the beginning of March and completed that secondment. It was a fantastic opportunity for me, coming out of the corporate world and working in a not-for-profit organisation, but working a lot across public, private and voluntary sector organisations was great fun. And actually, the huge amount of freedom I had in terms of not working directly in a big corporate when it goes through the treacle to get a decision, and actually being a bit more fleet of foot, meant that it was really good. What I was asked to do was to lead the Low Carbon Zone programme. And this was something that was set up by the Welsh Government as part of their regeneration. So the heads of the valleys, which probably everybody in the room will know, an area of chronic deprivation and some major issues. Now, actually, its carbon footprint has plummeted over recent decades because industry has gone away. So if you think about it, coal, steel have all disappeared. The carbon footprint's absolutely plummeted. What we were looking at, how do you re-stimulate the economy without doing this to its carbon footprint? How do we ensure we get a low carbon zone as well as an economically thriving and flourishing community in which for people to live and work? And that's actually quite a big challenge. And part of that piece is how do we make these things actually real for people in the valleys? there is a real issue in terms of initiative fatigue. You know, they've kind of seen a lot of this stuff before, and it's the next big idea. How do we actually make sure that this is something that they can genuinely see there's opportunities for jobs to come out of this, as well as some good talk about reducing carbon? And we recognise that we would need to work across lots of sectors, housing, business, but also the education sector in terms of skills, and skills at all levels. So we're not just thinking about the very hands-on piece, nor are we just thinking about the very professional end. It's about how are those skills and those jobs going to be created right across the whole piece. So my remit was to engage the collective voice of business, so that as businesses with a vested interest, and that was a really important point from my point of view, that these businesses were actually there with the hope of getting commercial gain. Because commercial gain relates to jobs, and jobs relate to these communities being sustainable. If they can be put in a way which means that local people have the right skills in the right place at the right time. Great words, much easier said than done. So I'll come on to some of the details about what we're actually looking at what we have actually done, and actually helping people to identify what genuine green opportunities there are out there. Comes on to the research. So some of you in the room might be aware of this piece with regards to Arbed, which is the Welsh Government's programme. Arbed means save. And it's actually very, very innovative, the way that the programme's been brought together, because it brings different parts of Welsh Government together and pooling their resources in terms of actually coming up with sufficient budget to do something big. Now, this programme doesn't just relate to the heads of the valleys, but it is targeted at strategic regeneration areas in Wales, of which there are 6, and the heads of valleys is 1. So it had a direct relevance. What's also quite interesting is that they were looking at this from the point of view of homes, so the housing sector is a key part, and looking at a whole house approach in terms of energy savings. What this means is that there's lots of opportunities for different types of businesses to be involved and different types of commercial opportunities, each of which could potentially then create employment. So what the intent of Arbed is to ensure that Welsh businesses and Welsh people get the opportunities that this new type of funding was going to bring. What I did was took this idea, which was happening anyway in the marketplace, and brought together a number of businesses that would be interested in working and making this real. And the way I went about doing this was that I identified those businesses with a vested interest, that where this market potentially was going to be of interest to their business. The way I did my litmus test to see whether I had the right people in the room with the right degree of interest is we held our first meeting at 7 a.m. on a snowy morning in Ebervale. And they all turned up, so I knew I'd got it right. And I knew that that meant, you know, from a business perspective, this was something that was of interest. However, what I also recognised is that those businesses in the room were normally competition with each other. And therefore, how do we get them to start to work together in a way that meant we were looking at what the great potential was in terms of job creation, not in terms of individual businesses and presenting themselves. So what we focused on is around the housing sector, and in particular the social housing providers, about what they were planning to do within this Arbed programme. What came back from those businesses at that first meeting was really quite interesting, because everybody could see part of the picture, but they quickly recognised they couldn't see the whole picture, and that they did need each other if we were going to actually make this into something that was an opportunity for Wales, and an opportunity to create genuine, sustainable green jobs. What they also recognised is that that would be very helpful in terms of their business planning. So we went from a body language of this at the beginning of the meeting to genuinely this as we went through the discussions. And those businesses started to recognise that there was something in it, but there was work that needed to be done. What they saw in the housing sector is that some of those great opportunities that businesses could cherry pick with regards to some of this area had already been done. So of the there's easy to treat and hard to treat properties, the easy to treat social housing had already pretty much got that sorted. So what was left was the hard to treat properties. And of these, there's approximately 46,000 properties that are sort of within the remit of social housing and local authorities in the 5 different areas that make up the heads of the valleys. That meant that approximately half of them were going to be up for grabs in terms of potential work coming through, the hard to treat spaces. And that was a great opportunity, but still pretty much unknown in terms of what could be done. Some of the companies here provided the pictures of the type of work, because there was a lot of discussion about great opportunities, but what it really meant at a bottom-up level wasn't completely understood. And this is the sort of thing we were talking about in terms of the business opportunities that are out there. And of course, as part of hard to treat, it's also the external wall. And you think, okay, well, there's companies out there that develop and deliver external wall solutions. But as they described to me in far more detail than I really wanted to know, there's lots of complexities with doing things like that, because the roof has to be moved and the alignment of the roof angles have to be changed. So that's why they fall into the hard to treat, even though the technology itself is quite straightforward. And of course, within all of this, there's also all of the renewables space, which, as you read about all the time, is a huge growing market opportunity. And it's not limited to specific companies. So there are lots of businesses now actually stretching their own remit and developing into this space. Basically, anybody that runs any type of fleet service are looking at this as potential growth areas. Because if you've got people that go around and can go around to properties, then you've got opportunities to enter into this market space. And you've all also will have seen some of the things around the feed-in tariffs, particularly around the heat things coming through now, but the solar PV spaces, you know, with greater and lesser impact in different parts of the country, and still offering great commercial opportunities for businesses, still not completely sewn up as a market yet, and still not completely worked in, still quite a nice big window in terms of delivering, particularly on the solar PV and looking at the feed-in tariffs. So what our businesses went away and did after our first meeting was they said, yeah, there's all these great headline figures about the millions of pounds that are going to be out there. Prove it. And my challenge back to them was, you prove it. Tell me what you can really find from knowing your businesses and knowing what types of things you're going to be bidding for. Scotland had announced something like 30,000 green jobs were going to be created. And of course, as business people who run their day-to-day business, they were saying, show me how. Tell me where those numbers come from. So what we did, and what those businesses went on to do, was do a real bottom-up build. And they took what was in the RBED programme and also a CESP and CERT. And CESP and CERT are programmes that are run through the utility companies. Everybody is already paying a levy on their bills, which goes into a fund, which is then used for the CESP and CERT. And CESP is, I've written it down in case I forgot it, a Community Energy Saving Programme. And CERT is the Carbon Emissions Reduction Target. So those two programmes are already out there being run through, as I said, through the utilities. Millions and millions of pounds potential there. Big figures. What the businesses wanted to understand is what that really meant in reality. And so it was the businesses themselves who looked at the different measures that were in RBED, CESP and CERT and built up what that looks like in terms of actual working days and the types of green skills that would be involved in it. So who can really challenge a loft insulation company when they say to deliver that measure, it's going to take 0.4 of a working day? It's about as accurate as anybody's ever going to get. So we were able to look across all of the measures and actually say per household, there's 17 working days worth of work to deliver a measure on that house. So what this shows is we took that original 17 days and then said, okay, so businesses, tell us what's a green skill. because there's lots of things out there. In some definitions, it's so broad, it's anything that's ever happened and anything that's likely to ever happen. And in some things, it's so specific, it's simply down to the renewables. So we asked the businesses themselves and said, in your view, what is a green skill? And that gave us a list of 33 things. Now, this is not a complete comprehensive definition of green skills. This is what relates to what those funding pots will actually be funding. So it's a very, very pragmatic approach to actually identifying that. We then asked them we then did a multiplication basically of the types of work that were involved in each of the measures against those 17 working days and the types of jobs that would be needed. And we're able to come up with a figure for the heads of the valleys that related to the actual number of sustainable jobs. And our definition of sustainable here was 3 years plus. So if there's sufficient work there, and there's funding there, and the types of jobs that are needed, then where I've got the thing here shows the actual number of jobs that are going to be created in each of those different spaces. And what became really interesting, and what the Welsh Assembly government was particularly interested in, was where some of those big numbers hit. So what we saw was some big things in terms of the insulation and the external wall, which means the programme is now going forward looking specifically at training green skills around that area. We now know that that opportunity's got funding. It's going to happen in the heads of the valleys. The skills going to be needed. They're sustainable jobs. There's opportunities for business to do it. Let's make sure we've got the right skills in place at the right time to fulfill that need. Because what was happening and is still happening is those skills are being shipped in and shipped back out again, particularly in that particular example. The skills are coming from Scotland and the skills are coming from Romania. And yet there are people in the heads of the valleys who would love to have a job in this space, but nobody's linked those things together. And so this programme is all about connecting all of those different elements. What we also took as part of this is I asked for a very crude average of what salary people could expect to be paid against those roles. And actually what came up was that they were well paid, reasonably well paid roles for that type of, certainly for the region, but 20, 30, 40k type jobs. And what that actually meant in terms of a potential for the heads of the valley's economy is something like £102 million per annum. If all of those jobs were filled by local people, there would be £102 million coming into the economy that hasn't previously been there. That's new money. We're doing some work with Cardiff University now as a next stage to actually look at how much of that is likely to be spent locally. Gut feel tells us about 70%, but is it different in such a close-knit community such as the heads of the valleys? And what happens to sort of the wider social impact of that, with post offices reopening and theatres and cinemas opening up, sandwich shops, cafes starting up? What happens to the broader economy? Some more work going on with regards to that. What we've also done is form a number of subgroups looking at the specific issues that have come out of it. One of those subgroups is with education. And so we're working across the piece because, as I said, it ranges right through from professional skills right down to real hands-on stuff, of actually developing the courses that mean people are going to come out with the right skills at the right time for the opportunities that exist. Now, one example at a very bottom level is a training centre for NEETs, not in education, employment or training, for those people who've already walked through the door of a centre in Merthyr and they want to retrain, they want new skills, but 90% of them asked to do bricklaying. And actually, when they complete the bricklaying course, there's no jobs because the construction industry is in its current turmoil. However, there are jobs in rendering and plastering that can't be filled locally. So what we're working with both the delivery and with the individuals is actually linking those things together to say, well, if you do this type of course, actually there's potential work coming out of it. What we're also doing is working at the more professional level and the entrepreneurship level to say about the innovation that's needed and the potential new businesses that will come out of the back of a thriving economy. And also, once you have a low carbon zone, the other low carbon businesses that will spin off from it. We've met with a number of ministers, both before election and post-election now, so some different people are around on that. Had a fantastic response to this. Because it's the voice of business advising and researching and actually providing the information for themselves, this has got real credibility. And ministers are very keen and are asking for our support with regards to some of the procurement issues that have come up, that I'm sure some of you will have come across. Developing the next phase of Arbed, which is Arbed 2, which is for the winter time of this year. The special group that I talked about on the external wall, because of the number of opportunities that are coming around that, and doing a new NVQ is being developed specifically out of the research that's come out of this. The whole green skills piece, and making sure that green skills are involved much more across the board in education, that there is an element of sustainability in everything that pupils are looking to do. And the whole curriculum development right through from school, right up to HE. We've also been asked and cited then as an example of how to be involved in a regeneration programme and the opportunities it brings for businesses right across the piece and the supply chain of those businesses as they continue to develop. And one of the other things the programme is doing is we're mentoring Year 11 pupils in Penydre, in Merthyr. Fascinating. Fascinating because one of the things I was told about before I started the programme was about the lack of aspiration that exists in the heads of the valleys. And I took that with a bit of a pinch of salt and maybe thought it was a bit of an urban myth. But actually, when I went along and met some of the kids, it's so true. And actually, when I talked to them about what we're doing, which is some mentoring by business directors directly to the pupil, one-on-one mentoring, the questions were things like, is this my last chance? Well, they're 15 years old. It can't be their last chance on anything. And yet their aspirations were so different to my own son, who's 15, who basically thinks he can go anywhere in the world and do whatever he wants. And we're only 20 miles apart. So there really is a big cultural piece there here that you know, we shouldn't underestimate. The other thing I learned from that mentoring programme was we asked for pupils to volunteer to be mentored around green skills. All the business directors were in some way linked with green skills. And we asked for 15, and all 15 were boys. So somehow already out there is an assumption that a green job is a boy's job. And I think we've got a big gender issue thing to do there to make sure, you know, a lot of these were, in the green space, these are not necessarily dirty jobs. They're not the old style of plumbing. And yet somehow that image is already there. So big piece of learning and a lot of things that we can do when we want to do. So why was BT involved in this? Well, in terms of our capacity to bring all of those elements together, that's why they agreed to my secondment. I think we've had some notable success. The programme still continues under business in the community, and I've spoken to them earlier on. And you know, if there are businesses here today that would like to be involved in something like that, I can give you the contact details. It continues to work away at this, and it continues to expose some of the great opportunities I think that the green economy is going to be bringing to the region.